Are we?
We are broadcasting live.
So any of you who have been watching our meetings in the past know that we start pretty much every meeting by saying, are we live yet? So we must be official. Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to Creating the Future's September 2016 Board and Community Meeting. And I'm so excited to be here. I am Hildy Gottlieb with Creating the Future. And we've got a full room and a full bunch of people who are out, hopefully in the Twitterverse tweeting in.
Hello.
I want to remind everybody, if you are tweeting, please use the hashtag CTFuture, or we will not see your tweet. So that is my big announcement for the day. We're good from there. Let's do, for those of you who are new to our meetings at Creating the Future, one of the things that we know from our work and catalytic thinking that guides our work is that the most favorable conditions we can ever create for success are those that bring out the best in people. And the best way to bring out the best in people is for us to share what is going on in our lives that is awesome, to just touch base with each other and see, learn a little bit about each other, because we've got a room full of people who may not know each other here. Because we've got so many people today, what I'm going to ask is if you could share a brief awesome. Let's not go over 2 minutes. If you can do it in 30 seconds, that would be fabulous. But just something that is going on in your life that is awesome. And I will encourage anybody that is watching via the blog, via the video, to please join in. We want you in the room with us, so let us know that you're here, say hello, and join us also in sharing what's awesome with you. So Angie, I see is dark there. Angie, I just want to make sure, can you hear us? Nope, not okay. We will check in with Angie in a minute. And so if you will, I will be introducing you guys just very, very briefly, and then just share a little something that's awesome with you. And I will start with folks who are used to the awesomes, and we can, so that you guys sort of get a feel for things. And no better place to start than Rebecca Hurd, who is beaming in from Boise, Idaho. And Rebecca is sort of my counterpart here at Creating the Future, the two of us co-leading pretty much everything that's been going on around here. So Rebecca, what is awesome with you today?
Hello, everyone. If my audio ends up being too choppy, let me know, and I'll end up going to my phone. I'm having some internet challenges today. But the awesome is I was at the playground. We normally are about 100 miles north from Boise, but we have a lot of family down here. So I was at the playground last night with my grandkids, and that really tires you out. And I was waiting for my husband to come tag me after a while running around on the jungle gym so I could go get some liquid refreshments. But we'll be having the grandkids and everyone at our house tomorrow night for my stepdaughter's birthday. So I guess my awesome is when I am in a community, I jam it full of opportunities to convene and bring people together. So these 24 hours are all about our family.
So I just like the fact that you guys need to know that Rebecca is preparing for a marathon. So if you're tired out by grandkids, this marathon thing, an interesting combination there. Stacy Ashton is beaming in from just outside of Vancouver. Stacy, tell us what's awesome with you.
I get to go to Montreal tomorrow for a Volunteer Canada conference, and my husband's going to meet me there, so we get on a weekend in Montreal. Yay, perfect.
Have fun.
Oh,
Have fun. Wow.
Yeah.
And Jane Garthson, who is beaming in from Toronto, tell us what is awesome with you.
Well, I haven't been in a Zoom room for a while, so I'm still glowing from giving a concert in Pittsburgh. So most of the people here didn't hear about that. And it wasn't a big audience, but they stayed and they had fun. I got nice feedback. You don't usually get to give your first concert at 65.
Nice.
Pretty awesome. That is very, very awesome. Susan Detweiler, who is coming to us from Wilmington, Delaware. Tell us what's awesome with you.
I'm still glowing from this past weekend where I gave two different sessions at a Philanthropy Takes Flight conference in Mukilteo, Washington, and then spending a day exploring Seattle with Andrea John Smith, who we had never met in person, and we spent 5 hours together, and it was if we had known each other forever because we'd been Zooming together and being part of this amazing family as fellows. So, and the flights were smooth and everything was well received. And it was like a little mini vacation once I finished that second session.
Oh, how wonderful. Wonderful. Susan and Andrea posted a photo for, I don't know if it was in general at Facebook or just in the fellows group at Facebook, but you guys have this huge yellow plume behind you. It looked like this huge feathered hat.
It was glass. It was a Chihuly exhibit. We were at the Chihuly Glass and Museum. No, Chihuly House and Glass or something like that. Yeah.
Well, that's coming to Toronto shortly, to the Royal Ontario Museum,
Oh,
their exhibit.
oh, how amazing. How amazing. One of my awesomes years and years ago was that for my birthday, my daughter was living in Florida, and it took me to a Chihuly foundry where she treated me to an hour of glass blowing, which was awesome. It did not look like a Chihuly. It looked like a lump. But it was still very, very awesome.
And it's all yours.
And it is all
You did it yourself. Yes.
Absolutely, absolutely. Angie Eikenberry, who is on Creating the Future's board, tell us what is awesome with you. Are you home in Omaha?
Yes, I'm here in Omaha in my office right now on campus, and it is awesome weather today, which you can't see very often here. So enjoying that. And the other awesome I have is that my bathroom is almost done. It's been working on all summer. It's getting so close. Welcome everyone. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, it's amazing how the little things are the big things. No kidding. Anne Vermel, who is beaming in from Fresno. What is awesome with you, Anne? Cannot hear you.
I wondered about that. Can you hear me now?
Absolutely.
Okay. This is an up and down thing because I hear you better with the earphones off, but if you can only hear me with the speaker this way, we'll do it. Awesome. When you came to Fresno and met with the Community Foundation, corruption entered their lives. And just last week, they called and asked me if I would lead a board source training in fundamentals of board. And I said, only if I could corrupt the training. And they said, yes.
Excellent. Excellent. Go corruptors. Corruptors of the status quo. And speaking of corruptors of the status quo, Mark Eckhart, who is in, I think you're in the valley outside of LA. Yes, where are you today, Mark?
In Encino Hills, yes, the valley.
What is awesome with you, Mr. Eckhart?
Well, after 8+ months of home remodel and reconstruction, we are finally done. And it is incredibly awesome.
That is hugely awesome. Very hugely awesome. Yay, yay. Mark is a former board member of Creating the Future, and so we're really glad that you're here. Joyce Lee Ibarra, beaming in from Hawaii.
That's right. Let's see here. My awesome is last week on Thursday and Friday, I spent 2 days at an evaluation conference. And so my head is just exploding with information about data visualization and how to use photography and video to kind of, you know, add depth and texture to evaluation. And so there's just a lot of stuff flying around, and I feel like appropriate that this conversation is happening right after that one.
Yes, excellent. We will just pull stuff out of your head. Vu Lee, who is beaming in from Seattle. Tell us what's awesome with you, Vu.
we just finished our pilot year of programming, and we had a celebration for our fellows. And the host sites came up on stage one at a time and thanked their fellow and shared a story about them. And it was really great. And I don't think a lot of people knew what my organization does. So it was really nice to show them what we do.
Oh, yeah. Yes. Wonderful, wonderful. And what you do is pretty amazing. So that's pretty awesome. I'm looking forward to hearing the showing part, because I think that's a lot of what we're talking about here today. So very cool. Sean Stevens, who is beaming in from Wilmington, Delaware. Tell us what's awesome with you, Sean.
Well, other than being connected into this group, and thanks to Susan Detweiler, I'm kind of new to transitioning from careers in nonprofits to being a consultant, and so I've engaged with a couple organizations. So after so many years of championing things like collective impact and making sure people know what outcomes are and trying to achieve them and measure them, I feel like I can create a little impact and work one-on-one with so many great organizations here in Delaware.
Excellent. Oh, wonderful. And Caitlin Vasile, who is in from Caldwell, Idaho. Beautiful Caldwell, Idaho.
Beautiful might be a little bit of a stretch, but it is great. My best friend's getting married this week, and so I am taking the rest of the week off to be with her and her family, and it'll be great. And then last week, meeting with Rebecca and being surprised that coffee was awesome. So there's lots of awesomes going on in our world right now.
Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. Rebecca makes awesome things happen.
She does. She does.
Oh, yeah. Sue Kindred, who is beaming in from Richmond, Virginia. Tell us what's awesome with you today, Sue.
Well, I am so delighted to be a part of this group. Thank you for asking me to sit in on this today. So I'm celebrating the fact that Saturday I had my first ever strategic planning session with the Help with Alcohol, and they did great. We had mimosas and Bloody Marys, and the group was just brilliant. We put a bow on their strategic plan and put together a plan for its first review. So I'm celebrating that. Jane, I really want to hear what your performance was all about, because I am taking, at the age of 61, taking tap dancing lessons. And I have my first recital next spring. So
we need to talk. My singing lessons start up again tonight after a summer break. We need to set up an online meeting, Sue.
Absolutely. So I'm celebrating reinventing ourselves as we get older.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Ben Roberts, and Ben is, I must say, Ben is not only beaming in from Danbury, Connecticut, which is the home of my childhood best friend, but also is the one who just maybe a year ago introduced us to Zoom, and we have been using and wringing everything we can out of Zoom since then. So thank you, Ben, and tell us what is awesome for you today.
Yeah, well, you're very welcome, and thank you for inviting me here. The number one awesome thing today is that it looks like I'm going to get an expenses paid invitation to Tübingen, Germany, for a conference in mid-October with an initiative I've been working with since February called Leading for Wellbeing. That's all about gathering leaders from around the globe to create a strategic plan for shifting our economic narrative from the dominance of neoliberal thinking to an economy in service to life. And we'll have the likes of Hunter Lovins and Jeffrey Sachs there. So I'm quite excited that they're going to fly me out. And I'm hoping that out of that work, one of the pieces I want to bring is a series of wakes for neoliberalism that would be held around the world.
I never thought I would be celebrating a lot of wakes, but I'm good with that. I'm good with that. Well, and those seem to go very well with Sue's strategic planning over mimosas and Bloody Marys, so I think we're good. I think we're good. Dimitri Petropoulos, what is awesome with you?
Well, first of all, wow, just having everybody on the screen here having everybody on the screen is just remarkable and wonderful, and I'm so glad that it's working. And I've just been testing it on YouTube, and I can actually hear everyone, so this is just amazing and awesome. Two other quick things I wanted to express my awesomeness on. I had a call from my youngest yesterday who in passing said, oh yeah, just doing some video auditions. There was like a Coen Brothers movie that was directed by, I'm sorry?
George Clooney.
Yeah, by George Clooney. And so he's got a video audition to it or whatever. And it just says, I don't expect to get it. I said, yeah, but the very fact that you're even in the pool of people who are auditioning for a part in that. So that's really amazing. And the other thing I wanted to mention is I rode my bike yesterday, which was first time in a while. And I rode to where I usually ride on Sundays, which is the farmer's market. And had some wonderful conversations with people there about the Tucson having been designated a UNESCO World City of Gastronomy, which is certainly not one thing you would think of when you think of Tucson. And they're like all jazzed about it and whatnot. So it was just awesome to talk to them and to watch there and to feel their enthusiasm, because these are farmers in many cases, the actual producers that come to the farmers market. So they thought it was really cool. So those are my 3 awesomes today.
Cool. I will, Dimitri, you mute? I will let you know that Dimitri and I are sitting next to each other. And so I need to both mute and turn off my audio when he's talking. And that means I need to know when he's going to talk and press 3 buttons at the same time. And they actually have to show up on the screen. So if you hear, it's because I don't have enough fingers. Did we forget anybody? Has everybody been? I think everybody's been their awesome selves. Do we have any awesome tweets? Has anybody?
Yes.
Who?
Kent Shell.
Kent Shell.
Wanted to say good morning and that he's watching from Southern California.
Okay, so that's my new awesome, is that Kent is watching, because Kent is awesome.
And I have 2 more not able, who aren't tweeters, but they're watching some more Idaho Love. We have Michael Bess and Donna Shines who are tuning in to participate, watch the live stream. So, hey guys.
Wonderful. And if you are participating either via Twitter or want to throw some things in the comments at the blog, when we summarize everything and pull it all together, we will use all of that stuff. So that, because all the participation doesn't matter really where it comes from, so long as that we pull it all together. What I thought might be helpful is for me to give a little bit of grounding. I'll take like 5 minutes, give a little bit of grounding of where we've been and where we're going, so that we can all start this conversation. And so where I want to start is just by talking about the fact that, and Dimitri, if you can get ready and cue up the video, because we'll be yay! We'll see if that works. One of the amazing things about Zoom is that when it works, you can actually embed video into it and stream video. And just another plug for Zoom, because we use it for all our classrooms. Zoom actually allows you to do breakouts. So if this were a meeting where we needed to do like groups of 3, everybody go off and then come back together. So, okay, my plug for Zoom is over. Talking a little bit about what we're going to do today. Creating the Future is a collection of people around the world who are supporting each other in a grand experiment. And the experiment is quite simple. It is to determine how much better the world could be if the questions we ask in our day-to-day lives are consistently bringing out the best in each other. If everybody everywhere is bringing out the best in every person they encounter, and especially if the systems that guide our behaviors are built to bring out the best in us, how much closer could our world be to being the humane place that we all want it to be? And so the why for our work is all rooted in the vision that so many of us share, a world that works for everyone, where everyone is living well individually and collectively. And we know this is possible simply because it's not impossible. So our mission and our plans are all a contribution towards that vision. Our mission is to harness the power of cause and effect, to bring out the best in as many people as possible in as many systems as possible by the end of 2026. We have given ourselves 10 years. And that's through the questions that people ask in their day-to-day lives. And so what I thought would be helpful, I know I sent it to you guys who are in the screen here. I'm not sure if everybody got a chance to see it, but we've got a quick 2-minute video that really explains when we talk about harnessing the power of cause and effect, why that's important. And it's not just to our mission, but it will also help you understand the approach to the questions that we're going to ask today, which is catalytic thinking. So Dimitri, do you have the video that you can put up?
Yes, I do, and here we go.
Oh, no sound. It's got no sound.
I can hear it.
You can hear it?
Yeah.
No. Can you guys hear it? Nobody else can hear it. You're the only one who can hear
No, we can't hear it. There is a special box you check off, right, to have it use everyone's computer sound.
it. Did you do that?
What was the?
Ben said there's a box you check off to make sure that everybody's computer can hear it.
Yeah, it's in the screen sharing window. There's like 2 boxes, one for video resolution and the other for audio.
And our resident Zoom expert, yay, Ben. Questions. We can change everything. Right. Instead of asking reactive questions,
Start it over.
like what is the problem?
Thank you, Ben.
Hi, I'm Hilda Gottlieb with Creating the Future. The work we do at Creating the Future is all built around a framework we call catalytic thinking. We call it catalytic because when we use these practices, things happen and they happen quickly. Small actions create really big results. We talk about the thinking because it's not really the actions that we do that create the results we want, but the thinking that goes into those actions. When we change the way we think about things, it changes the actions that create our results. So how then do we change our thinking? We change our thinking by changing the questions that we ask. When we change the questions, we can change everything. Instead of asking reactive questions, like what is the problem and how will we solve it, we can ask, what is the future we want to create? And what would it take to create that? Instead of asking questions that suspect the worst in each other, we can ask questions that bring out the best in each other. Who else cares about this thing we care about? And what can we accomplish together that none of us could accomplish on our own? Instead of asking questions rooted in scarcity, how will we pay for this and where will the money come from? We can ask questions rooted in the spirit of collective enoughness, the wisdom that tells us that together we have everything we need. It's only on our own that we experience scarcity. Questions like, what resources do we have together that none of us have all of on our own? These powerful questions are at the core of the catalytic thinking framework. The results of these practices are consistently positive because they're rooted in questions that bring out the very best in the people around us and the situations we encounter. And there's nothing more catalytic than bringing out the best in every aspect of our lives and our work. I look forward to talking with you more about this powerful set of practices, to share what catalytic thinking can mean for your own work. Okay, now I just got to get my screens back here.
Thank you, Ben.
Except that I didn't hear a single word of that.
Oh.
But did I look good?
You look lovely. I'd watched it last night, so it's okay.
First things first. First things first. And so what I really just wanted to share a little bit, again, how that relates to our mission is harnessing that power of cause and effect. What is the future we want to create? What will it take to create that in as many systems as possible by the end of 2026? And the reason that we talk about a 10-year mission is because there is tremendous power in setting a deadline. You know, we all know, I mean, how many of us don't do anything until the deadline comes? We all know lots of organizations that just assume that they're going to be around to just do their work without really setting a, here's what we want to accomplish and by when. And here's what we want to see looks different and by when. I frequently refer to Kennedy because Kennedy said, we want to put a man on the moon and bring them back within 10 years. And all the engineers said, you're crazy, it can't happen. We don't know how to do that. And that's what people are telling us. How can you set 10 years and this is crazy, this is a big hairy goal to achieve in 10 years. Bottom line is the space program did it in 8 years. And so we know that setting a goal is a powerful thing. Our plan is very simple. We are going to be and continue to be an experiment in what it takes to make the world a more humane place. And being an experiment is all about trying things and seeing what works and then trying other things. Catalytic thinking is going to guide us, and we know that thinking works because it's rooted in millennia of stuff that works. You know, ask 17 people what brings out the best in people, and they will come up with 17 versions of the same thing. It's not as if we don't know what brings out the best in people. And so if the systems that we use are all bringing out the best in people and situations, our experiment is to see what happens when those systems actually embody that. And when we say systems, we mean everything from societal systems, legal systems, judicial systems, organizational systems, the systems that we create inside of our own families. If the systems that guide our actions in the day-to-day situations we all encounter are bringing out the best in people, you know, just that alone will be creating a better world. And so our work is to support people in doing that, making sure people have what they need to create those systems changes. And a big part of that is monitoring to make sure that we are learning and sharing what we're learning. That we need to be, if this is an experiment, we need to be able to say, this might work better than this, and to define what does working mean. That's what we're going to be talking about today. And we'll be using the catalytic framework to have that conversation to create the conditions for what makes great stuff happen. So that's where we're going to be today. And I hope that helps ground everybody. So in the spirit of the questions that you just saw on the screen there, we're going to start with what good would look like. What is the future we want to create? And very, very specific to indicators for mission success. So because the most favorable conditions we can ever create are the conditions that bring out the best in people, what will having indicators of success make possible, and for whom will it make that possible? So who are the people for whom we're creating these indicators, and what would those indicators make possible for them? So let's start with for whom. For whom can indicators make a difference? Indicators of our mission success.
I would say that they will help us, or they're for us to know if we're on track with what we're trying to achieve.
Define us.
Us being the people here online, but anybody who's already sort of part of the creating the future movement.
Okay, great.
I would be thinking, since the goal is to see these questions and this approach seed into all of our systems, media systems, school systems, mental health systems, all across the board. It's the decision makers in those systems. We want, they need indicators to know how much this way of thinking has become the new kind of cultural norm in the system.
Great. Who else?
I think for me, one of the key things we talk about indicators is how they contribute to both sustainability and creating a movement. And if people don't feel, if networks don't feel that we're moving the needle on something, then why be a part of it? So I think that we talk about systems. I a kind of a realization in reading this book, Accelerate by John Carter, and maybe we talked about systems, we mean networks, but networks are all those clusters throughout this that are contributing to make these systems work and really accelerate the growth of those. So I think that that's what that does.
So it's interesting. Angie was talking about people who are already part of the movement. You're talking about people who might become part of the movement. Yeah.
I'd like to add influencers, the academics teaching leadership courses, or practically any course actually. Foundations looking for people who are grantees who are building abundance and bringing out the highest potential of the people they're serving, instead of the ones who say, well, we need more and because the problems are worse, kind of thing. The people who have the money to support this actually are looking for organizations and individuals that they see already bringing out the best in people and situations, and they're willing to help scale it.
You know, I'm hearing in what you're saying, Jane, two different kinds of influencers. One are the influencers who influence with their dollars. So in the for-profit world, that's investors, and in the nonprofit world, that's foundations, governments, whoever is investing with their dollars, understanding what actually creates success would be pretty awesome. And you're also talking about influencers. When you said academics, I immediately thought of consultants and advisors and people who are in roles that are guiding, who are seen as the experts, the people that we always quote. Whether or not they're actually right or not, they're the people that we quote.
I'd like to add that build on what Sean said, which is that they're a measure of progress, and for the people who are just starting out and trying it to see if it works for them, a measurement of progress is a really important support mechanism. It's also a measure of progress for those of us who are working in the movement to try to make things happen. If we find that if we can see those measurements, it just keeps us moving forward.
Yeah, I want to build on that. I think for me, the key audience, part of the challenge for people who recognize the possibility of radical systemic transformation is that's not the story we see in the mainstream. And so to have these measurements and these metrics helps us see something that's hard to see otherwise. The corollary to that is I'm not so sure, that people who don't recognize that possibility would value or pay attention to this. So it seems to me it's really the people that are devoted to that transformation who would most benefit, particularly at this moment in history.
Well, I want to add on to the people that we're talking about. When we're talking about influencers, we're also talking about government. We're talking about the civil society, the government, the legislators. They want that credibility to be able to say that if we do this and if we legislate in this direction, or if we blow up this particular system, then here's our rationale for doing it. But I also wanted to go in a slightly different direction in using indicators of success for ourselves in figuring out whether we need course correction. So if we are heading in a particular direction because we say that's going to be our indicator of success, and we're working and going along and we're realizing that that's not where we're heading, then it's an opportunity for us to tweak what we're doing.
I think it's also an opportunity for others to study us, like folks who are researchers, whether it's in organized institutions or just an interested party who's starting to look at system change, significant system change for good. What do healthy supportive systems look like? I'm going to start tracking this all over the world, whoever these researchers are.
There's actually been some really good research. The Knight Foundation did the Soul of the Community research, and it was all about what are the factors that cause community attachment. So, where people are really attached to their community and engaged in their community and where they're not, and they were looking at that. And a lot of the measures there were, you know, the level of trust, the level of hope, people's responses to questions like, I love my community is getting better, my community has a lot of things for me to do. Like, really measurement of hope within community was what they were looking at. And it seems to me that if this kind of questions and approach is active in a community, then that's what you'll see, is you'll see that kind of a level of hope. And if you backtrack into the soul of community findings, you find that. You find people are working together, you have more grassroots collective groups that are functioning well. You see all of that in those communities. And it would be interesting to see if there is some creating the future methods that are emerging from those communities. So, I mean, in essence, some of that indicator work might already be done.
Yeah.
I'd like to add to that, now that we're talking about research is what we need to convince the doubters. The ones who, you know, think these problems will always exist. The more specific you can be about what success looks like and how that needle's moving, the more the doubters have to say to themselves, oh, wait a minute here. Maybe I need to rethink this. Things that are really specific are what convince people. I listened to somebody yesterday on the radio. They'd done a study on how the number of trees actually directly correlated with lower crime rates in specific communities. But if it was a backyard tree, it had to be at least 42 feet tall or the correlation didn't work. I could go to why, but that's the point, is more that some people have to see quantitative numbers.
Right. Right. Well, and what I'm hearing, the researchers actually are sort of a for whom, because Susan, you were talking about policymakers, and you know, the researchers are working for investors and foundations, and they're working for academics, and so there's a whole different mindset there of for whom in research, because research is sort of a so what, okay, a for whom and a so what. I would like to welcome Carl Wilding, who was stuck on a train. Carl is beaming in from the UK, so and beaming in a little bushy there, honey. Tell us what's awesome with you these days.
Well, I've just had 2 weeks on holiday, so that's the awesome, the new chin. What's awesome? No, just sort of coming back to work after the summer, and there are lots of things that we sort of got on the agenda, and it's actually just a nice feeling, sort of, that the summer's still good, and looking forward to just getting stuck into things and being back at the board.
Yay. Yay, wonderful. Well, I'm not surprised that you said that you were on holiday, because when you popped up, my first thought was, I haven't seen you look this relaxed in years.
Well, sorry I'm late.
That's okay. Hold on to that feeling as long as you can.
I will.
I have a question from Kent.
Yes, Kent has a question.
Is there a role for outside monitoring, evaluating?
Okay.
And then the second question, are those who absorb our influence us? Are we trying to grow us?
Are those who absorb our influence now part of us? Are we trying to grow us? Which is a wonderful concentric circle sort of question, I guess. And you know, the interesting thing that we've always seen is that what creating the future is one of many stones in a pond. And that what matters is the ripples, and how many ripples, and how wide they go. And so yeah, the bigger us piece, I think, is it's why initially, Angie, when you said you know, it would be helpful for us, my first question is, who's us? And I'm always liking a bigger us. So If you guys could mute when you are not speaking, that would be helpful because there's a bunch of us here. Here's what I've got as a list. Obviously, it would help creating the future figure out if we're on track. Indicators of success would help people who are already part of this movement and self-identifying in that way. Decision makers and systems that folks inside this movement really would like to help influence. People in networks and clusters who are not yet thinking in these ways that bring out the best in people and could. Indicators would help influencers, whether those are advisors, consultants, academics, or financial influencers, investors, foundations. Indicators would help people who are just starting out on their path to help them have a sense of what's possible and where they are. It would clearly help policymakers in terms of credibility and rationale for new things that they want to try, and the researchers and evaluators who feed into that system. Is there any other for whoms that we missed as we start to ask, okay, here's a big list of for whoms. What does it make possible for them? Stacy, you're muted.
There we go. All right. So community members themselves. So people in the community, you would, instead of your individual neighbor kind of coming and having that, nothing in the neighborhood is working and everything is bad, that the shift is happening there, and that is reinforced back and forth by indicators. So they're seeing at like a very grassroots level, there's enough going on that's positive that it's noticeable on the ground.
Let's start there because that's fun. And many of you also mentioned that all we see is indication that life sucks and is only getting worse, and where many of us know that that's actually not the case. So let's start there. What would indicators of success of our mission make possible for folks in community? If the missions of so many of what we're doing to try to bring out the best in people through the questions that we ask, what is important about that for people in the community that they have indicated, that we have indicators?
Hildy, my argument to you is that people want to believe. I think social change activities like ours, for some people, if you'll excuse the metaphor, it's an article of faith, and they want to believe. And we've got to give them some evidence that their faith, because it is a leap of faith, we have to give them some evidence that their faith is justified. And now I must apologize because I've come late to the conversation, but my challenge to you, Hildy, here is I don't like that word indicators. I think that possibly I came in at the end of Jane's discussion before about quantification. But I may have said this to you last time I talked to you. I don't know if everyone here is familiar with Clay Shirky, that New York professor of journalism, and he was tweeting recently from the Republican convention, and he said, we brought an army of fact checkers to a culture war. And I think that's really important at the moment, because the environment that we're operating in at the moment is that indicators and facts and evidence are not as powerful as they used to be. What people want now are stories. I very deliberately use that word faith.
I don't disagree with you, Carl. I just know that different people respond different ways. And there are still people that care about truth and facts, even if some days the media makes it sound like everyone's forgotten.
Well, let's do this. Let us be as broad in our thinking and self-interpret what we mean by indicators, stories, evidence, demonstrating. Let's set aside the semantics for now. We will definitely, you guys, many of you know, we are all about language. We know that language matters, but at this broad place right now, let's set aside the semantics and talk about whether it is stories, whether it is evidence, whether it is I personally dislike the word evidence because it is, you know, it's reactive. It's proving ourselves. Let's set all that aside. And envision whatever you want in terms of knowing we're on the right path, knowing and being able to explain to somebody that we are on the way to bringing out the best in other people. If we have ways of doing that, and I love the fact that people want to believe and having the evidence that their faith is justified. What else does it make possible if we have got that evidence and share it in whatever ways we figure out how to share it?
Okay, so if I could hog the conversation for a moment, I think what it makes possible is replication. Okay, if this was a classic scientific method, we would have a theory about how change works, and then the living laboratory that is creating the future, we would be empirically testing that theory, and then we would be encouraging others to repeat our experiments to see if that theory holds true when they are testing it empirically elsewhere. So coming back to your thing about language, we at the beginning need some sort of theory of how we think change works, and then whether it's measuring or demonstrating, we want some sort of empirical evidence or story that shows people what that theory looks like in reality to make it possible for them to replicate.
Cool. Wonderful.
And I want to piggyback on that in that if we are providing evidence, empirical stories, whatever it is, that this works, and it can be replicable, that means we need to be able to provide what it used to look like, along with what it does look like, so that you can show the difference between what it was. So we need stories of before and stories of after.
What does that make possible, Susan? Moving from the how to the why, what does that make possible? If we have the before and the after, and anybody can answer. If you've got a before and after, what does that make possible for folks?
That's an indicator of success.
Okay, and what does that indicator make possible for them?
I think it's momentum. It gives you a feeling of momentum and moving forward, and that you're just kind of getting pulled along with the flow, and the flow is going in a direction you want it to go, so you can just follow it instead of drag your heels and say, I don't want any part of that future that is so terrifying.
I'd like to build on that, because what I'm thinking as people talk is the word champions. Because we have a lot of community organizations that are not negative, they just have inertia. It's just hard to get them moving in any direction. And if champions can give the stories of success to get them moving in the right direction, well, we all know that then they could start rolling downhill fast.
Yeah,
or maybe uphill in terms of good.
Yeah, what that's raising for me relates to your work, Mark. Because so much of what you're doing is all about championing what's possible in the business world.
Yes.
I think it's also important to note that it's very important for young people to be introduced early. I recently led a high school troop, a group of high school students through a program that was basically introducing them to catalytic thinking. And it was interesting to see how very immediately they grabbed hold of what they were hearing and wanted immediately to put it to work. So, so yes, it makes possible risk-taking as well as momentum.
I'm thinking too about like Vu Lee, last week you did a piece around what the leaders we need today are, and they were all very grassroots and focused on bringing the best out in their community. So I'm wondering if one of the indicators and one of the possibilities of having indicators is this idea that community leaders, we have a higher density of collaborative community leaders in any given community. So the more a community is creating the future practice, the higher density you'll see of community leaders who are doing collaborative work. That makes sense.
And what role do indicators play in that? What do the indicators, the stories, make possible?
They inspire the community leaders.
Okay, so
So
inspiration.
it's that local replication that Carl was saying, and the replication is inspiring leaders to take on that role. So that's what you're seeing, is you're seeing a higher density of that in any community, and a higher ability of those leaders to work together.
I guess I would also say we focus a lot on kind of this cause effect relationship, and somewhat obnoxiously teaches a research course. I'm reminded that this movement we're creating is more than that. It's not just about indicators of success, but it's also established some grounded theory. Let's do some things differently, even asking questions in a different way that we haven't before. So I think part of the inspirational part of all this is establishing this new grounded theory, or enhancing it to the point that people feel inspired. It's not just what we've always done and what we've always gotten. It's what's something new.
And can I jump in to build on that? I think it's about the process being as important as the outcomes and the impact. So when Carl was talking about replication and then the Susan's before and after, ultimately, if I were in the community, if I could see how something happened, and then I could think about how it might apply in my own situation, that's going to help me move to a place that's going to hopefully lead to broader participation and other engagement that is part of what we're about as well.
And thinking with all of the ripples, like what we're going to see out in the community is the ripples, but each of those ripples are humans, and each of those humans feels comfortable being able to unpack and deconstruct with the other people around their ripple. So you're modeling, the replicating and sharing of the thinking is inherently baked into how people are showing up every day in every part of their life. So they're able to the people where that person is and understand where that person is. So you're not just doing a brain dump on them of whatever the situation is, but you're showing up every day that way.
It's so interesting how often we hear, and we all hear it in our lives, yeah, that would be really nice, but how are you going to do it? And that ability to have more confidence that, we hear that I'm just one person, I can't, there's all of that, and that has nothing to do with what kind of organization or what, this is individuals, starting with community members. I'm just one person, I can't make a difference. And there's something, I hate to use, I know that if this were a drinking game, I'd probably have to take a shot, but I hate to use the word empower, but there's something really empowering about knowing, that having the confidence that something can actually work and it can actually make a difference.
I believe that it will create more optimism generally and further the knowledge that we all can exercise control over how and what we think.
Increased optimism.
We were talking about stories a few minutes ago, and when we were talking about that, all I could think about was that we are getting the opportunity to rewrite this story of systems. We're breaking the systems through. And by doing that, we're creating a story of hope and of struggle, and showing what great looks like in our own communities, and by showing up as the vulnerable person that we were created to be. And so we're no longer functioning within these systems, but how the human condition is already supposed to be functioning within. And when we start showing up in different places around the world as such, we're able to move forward and showing that as an indicator of that's already making a difference. By when we connect with the person that we're sitting next to, that's an indicator of how to make the community great again and again, and how to replicate that. By showing up is simply how we recreate the story. And by showing the vulnerable self is how we recreate the story. And this is how we're doing it, is it starts here with a group of 15, and then we meet in our workplace and we recreate the story. And so that's a little bit of what I was thinking about the whole time.
Yeah. Vu, before you go, thoughts? What are you seeing that having stories makes possible, and just general reflections, what's standing out for you from the conversation?
I think I need a little bit of time to think. I think it's a lot of really smart people talking about data and indicators, and I got 4 hours of sleep. I do like the combination of the qualitative and the quantitative stuff that we're trying to do. And yeah, I mean, we've been using some of the framework that from Creating the Future about working backwards and stuff. So I'm looking forward to seeing this. But already with my own organization, it's getting our leaders to start thinking about the kind of future and the kind of community that we are trying to create has been really helpful in shaping the kind of leaders that we need. So yeah, I'm really excited to see what comes out of these conversations. And thank you for inviting me. And I'm sorry for leaving so early.
Absolutely. Happy that you were here and glad that you at least got 4 hours sleep, because Lou's got a baby. So we all know what that means.
A baby and a toddler.
A baby and a toddler, absolutely, yeah. Thanks.
Thanks so much, everyone.
Thank you.
Peace.
Bye, Lou.
So as we're looking at it, I love, Caitlin, what you just went to, which is the opportunity that the indicators create an opportunity to create a new story. And that we do have that dominant story that everything starts, and that nothing will ever change.
So possibly congruent with that, possibly just using different words for the same thing, my mind was going into what indicators of the success of using causality, of understanding causality, would provide a new go-to for those people in our communities next to each other. Right now, the go-to is that things are not going to get better, or we're going to do an incremental thing. But if the indicator of success actually reflects back to how understanding causality can make a difference, then people would have that as a new go-to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think there's actually the new go-to and the understanding of causality are two different pieces in what you're talking about. They're related, but they're both what indicators make possible. Is that further understanding?
Yeah, it was a sequential thing that you needed both in order to get there.
Yeah.
I think another thing too, what made me hopeful is, I can't remember who said it now, but taking the group of students on the field trip and introducing them to catalytic thinking. Sorry, my apologies for not remembering who said that. But what's beautiful about that is that we're introducing younger minds to it, and it's a way that they will live. And the hypothesis is already starting to change, right? If we go back to that scientific model, the result is we have a younger group being raised up in this way of thinking, of breaking through the systems and functioning within the best of who we are. And the more we introduce it to a younger generation, the more of a reality this becomes, and the change that we start seeing at a greater impact.
So let's pivot here to the question of, okay, so some of, and let's just keep adding, as you think of new things that it would make possible, let's add to it. People who are tweeting, by the way, if you are watching and inspired to tweet something, the hashtag is CTFuture. If you want to post something in the blog, the backwards of what Dimitri's showing up there.
Speaking of tweeting, Kent has posted that it would create more optimism.
I actually got that from Dimitri and have added the optimism in because it's brilliant. It is part of what leads to that new story. So as you think of more things, we will definitely include them. But let me just share some of what you guys have talked about. That indicators, stories, whatever we want to call them, evidence. Evidence that their faith is justified, that beautiful statement that Carl made, that people want to believe in evidence that their faith is justified, which can lead to action. The potential for replication, evidence provides that. Evidence and indicators provide for momentum and moving forward, that you're being pulled along with a flow of what you do want rather than resisting the future that you don't want. It is, indicators can help create champions for this way of being, and especially champions who don't even realize they're being champions in young people who, if this just becomes the way they be in the world, that we don't have to reprogram, would be pretty awesome. Indicators can help with risk taking. It can create a higher density. I love the higher density of leaders who are using catalytic thinking in ways of bringing out the best in people. Can create inspiration and optimism. I love the term establish a new grounded theory. Indicators can help reassure that process is as important as outcome. Seeing how something happened, seeing how I could actually do that, being explicit about it. Individuals feeling comfortable and confident in their ability to step into new ways of being. That whole opportunity to create a new dominant story, a new go-to for people in community, the understanding that life is just cause and effect, and what does that mean in terms of, oh yeah, I can actually create cause and effect. Let me just share, Sean was posting in the chat, it seems we're stressing a need to emphasize indicators or outcomes rather than indicators of outputs, which certainly focuses on the real cause and effect relationship. Yes, so much of what we see in social change organizations is measuring outputs because they're easy to measure. What we frequently found is that what we're frequently measuring is stuff, because it's easy to measure stuff, but the most important thing is people. And so we talk about measuring and evaluating and all of that. And when it's, am I thinking different? Am I feeling different? Am I acting different? So let's jump in there. If these are all the things that having indicators of success make possible.
One more.
Go, Ben, go.
Yeah, I want to build on the risk taking. And this kind of relates to my sense of cause and effect. I tweeted about the Cynefin framework and what it has to say about understanding that or not when you're dealing with complex adaptive systems, and the idea, of an agile approach that we're probing, sensing, responding. We're trying things out to see what happens in the system. If we don't have good indicators for what we want, we can't do those experiments well. So I think that to me is a really practical and valuable piece that I see in all this.
Oh yes, absolutely, absolutely, wonderful.
And Hildy, I'm going to jump in with one more as well. Just hearing you list those off kind of triggered something else for me. I think that indicators can be helpful in other social movements finding overlap and finding commonality in this framework, because I think on the front, depending on what sort of agenda, and I don't mean that in a loaded term, but what sort of agenda another social movement might have, they might not see that we're trying to work towards a common endpoint. But then seeing the language expressed as indicators can actually help people identify the common ground, even though on the surface, our agendas may be different.
Yeah. And frequently what we find is that the why is the same and the how is different. So what we're doing is different, but the being is the same. And yeah, that is perfect. Wonderful. Sue and Mark, you guys have been quiet, and I want to make sure that before we move on.
I just had one thing I'd like to say. Thank you, and apologies for having to duck in and out. Listening to all of this and absorbing it, what it strikes me is that there's this holistic piece to it where we want to come full circle. And I think what having these indicators, although I prefer the word stories, Carl, I love what you said earlier about stories, because that's what I do is storytelling, is that it gives people an opportunity to embrace a new normal. And I think that has a lot of value, because when things change, you feel like you're moving through change, and then you get to the place where you can say, this is our new normal. And I think it gives everybody the parameters or the template for doing that.
I like that. I think that jives so beautiful with what Caitlin was saying before in terms of creating a new story, a new dominant story, a new normal. I love that.
I like what she said earlier about understanding. It helps us understand what great looks like in our communities, because I think that we have a tendency to, we have the status quo bias, and it helps move us out of that.
Wonderful.
Having indicators of success, and while we talk about the stories, so often in our communities we say, well, they're different from us, we're not them. So we might hear somebody else's success story and say, well, we can't do that, they have 300 people in their community and we only have 25, or something like that. By using an indicator of success that shows that this is replicable regardless of how big you are or what you're trying to accomplish, that makes it easier for communities to consider it as an alternative go-to, as in a different way of doing something.
Well, it took an hour and 15 minutes and my head just went, you know, so that I'm hearing what Joyce was talking about in terms of other types of social movements, and what you're talking about, Susan, in terms of people saying, well, you know, that wouldn't work for us, that would, and the whole piece about stories, and the fact that we so delineate, we so silo our thinking in terms of that would work for them because. And so what you're talking about has to do with social change, but I'm about business. Or what you're talking about has to do with large organizations or with tiny organizations. It could never work in our large organization. And I'm loving the fact that pretty much everything we've been talking about here really comes together under that moniker that I'll be more polite of the way we normally say it, which Rebecca's smiling at, which is this stuff works, and it works everywhere, because this is about bringing out the best in people, and that it really comes down to everything that you guys were talking about here, because it's about what happens when we bring out the best in people and can show that in some way and can tell that story.
So Hilde, can I just add to that? And I'm going to be a pedant for a moment, as is my wont. There are indicators of success that are what success potentially looks like. And that strikes me as quite different from indicators of success that are progress towards what that potential looks like. They're two quite different things that we might want, and they enable two different outcomes. The indicators of what potential looks like might be the sorts of stories that inspire people and make it think that it's possible. But then the indicators where you can actually demonstrate that we progressed along the journey towards that goal of what's potential make different things possible. They make resources possible because you've proved that something actually works. Again, and it's pedantry and a small thing, but there is a difference, and it just struck me as important.
It's great. It's wonderful. They are two different things, and the demonstrating of progress beyond the yes, it's attracting to people who want to be part of that progress, whether it is resources or whatever else. But it's also that indicator that, oh, we're in the right direction. We're going in the right direction here.
Hilde, in the building on something that was said earlier, the overlap in social change movements is actually tied so directly to the principles, Pollyanna principles of interconnectedness, that it's really also a directive, I think, towards future action of this movement. Because if we don't start with our colleagues who are trying to make the world a better place, we probably are going to be fighting uphill battles, and that will be very difficult.
Right. I do want to ask, Mark, is there anything that's sparking for you, because you've been quiet and I know you're always thinking?
Yeah, I'm cooking over here. I don't quite have my ideas or my thoughts formulated, so hang in there and I'll dive.
I didn't want to not give you the chance, because some of us tend to talk more than others.
Thank you, though.
Yes, Dimitri.
Kent added that stories prove that alternate realities exist.
Stories prove that alternate realities exist.
And I just want to add that it's also an opportunity for celebration.
An opportunity for celebration. Alternate realities exist. Isn't it interesting that we call them alternate realities? It is just, I am sorry. It's such bullshit. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I wanted to jump in on that because, you know, especially if we think about, I don't remember who said it, that it's the new normal and kids have a, you know, start with a certain perception to begin with, or whomever. I think about this with my transportation advocacy work. Like, can we get to a point where it's just normal for people to jump on their bike to get somewhere just as much as jumping in their car? Do we get rid of car privilege? We get rid of white privilege. We get rid of, like, there's no alternative. Like, the alternative is actually the mainstream now. Like, how do we get to the mainstream and not talk about this as an alternative movement, I guess?
Yeah, yeah, it's just so interesting. I have frequently observed that in most of the world, the majority of our lives day to day are kindness. Because if the majority of our lives day to day were hell, we would all be walking around going like this constantly, and we'd feel it. And the majority of our lives are people being relatively nice to each other. And yet if you ask people, they say, people suck. So let's move beyond this now. Given everything that we have just talked about that indicators make possible, that sense of optimism, that creating a new story, which is about a current reality that may be seen as an alternate reality, the ability to cross across silos and etc. What would people need to
Hildy?
go?
Sorry, this is probably going to come out in just bits and pieces, but it feels like the possibilities that have been shared, which are amazing, have a certain outward quality to them. And I'm very curious about what what indicators will do in terms of what's going to be coming back in the form of helping to evolve this thing that we're calling catalytic thinking.
Yes, thank you.
And I mean, there's many. You can drop this into a number of different contexts or create a number of different contexts. Each of the possibilities are a context in and of themselves. But if people are literally living from the context of catalytic thinking, what does all this mean in terms of our ability to adapt and evolve it rapidly?
Brilliant. Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you.
One thing I was thinking about and kind of tied to Mark's thought is even on very much on the inward human, like the indicators of how you are going to be feeling inside. If you are being this everywhere in your world, you will feel different. You will have a different lens on the world. So the story of success at the story of one, moving from this to this way of thinking, as this is your way of being. You can feel it. You can measure it.
Yeah. So let's look at all of that. And the one thing that I did want to share, and it came up lightly in what you guys were talking about, but nobody hit on it directly, and I want to grab it while it has to do with what you were talking about, Mark. The interesting thing about what Creating the Future is doing as an experiment is that we've always seen success as being when people we've never heard of are being in this way with other people we've never heard of, and that it's not about creating the future. And that because catalytic thinking just brings together the wisdom of the ages of what brings out the best in people, that it's not about the dogma of it has to be catalytic thinking, But if people are in their daily lives changing the questions that they're asking in ways that bring out the best in other people, then it doesn't have to be called that. They don't even have to know they're doing it. But we find so often in our day-to-day lives, people who make us feel really good. They make us feel really connected. They make us, and that's the thing we want to amplify. And the more that we can, a big part of what Creating the Future's job is to break down the why of that. So the people that we find in our lives that make us feel amazing, that we think, well, that's just because they're that person, and they're magical, but I could never be that. That to be able to say, no, here's what they're doing, and here's why they make you feel so good. And guess what? You could do the same thing. That I think that's just a big part of that. It doesn't have to be the evidence that we find doesn't have to be evidence that creating the future's catalytic thinking is at play. That the evidence can be these amazing people are doing this amazing stuff over here, and look at the questions they're asking, and isn't that awesome? And it doesn't ever have to say creating the future in it. And I think that's part of what it means to grow the thinking, that it grows beyond, it doesn't become an ism, it just becomes the way we be. So that's sort of my, yeah.
Just to emphasize what you just said, I think in our parlance of a lot of groups, we call that a movement. That we want to create a movement. It's not about creating the future, because if people break off and do the stuff that still supports, the ideals, the principles, the stuff that we want to do, so be it. That's sustainability.
Yeah, sustainability of what matters.
Right.
Yeah.
And if I could follow on from Sean, what that sort of says to me, Hildy, is that attribution is not a fundamental part of measuring success. Contribution might be a fundamental part of measuring success, but too often we do sort of get hung up on this issue of attribution, that somehow it is, everything has to be traced back to the very specific magic ingredients that you or the people around us put into the soup pot. Sort of thing.
Talk about the contribution part of that, Carl. I love the attribution part, and that's the easy part. Talk about
it's something somebody said to me a few years ago that as it was actually about campaigning, and he said that the real challenge that we've got is convincing people that we've got to shift the terms of trade of the argument from attribution to contribution. And his argument was that lots of social change, it is born of many factors. There are lots of things that ultimately contribute to social change. And I might even look at, I don't know if the academics amongst us might have heard the expression policy windows, where it talks about how you have an opportunity and you have an entrepreneur, and you have all these different factors that just happen to come together during a window, and that's when change happens. So for us, when those windows of opportunity arise, when everyone agrees what the problem is and everyone agrees what the solution is, we somehow can be clear that we made a contribution to social change. But we are humble enough to recognize that we are not the only factor that contributed to social change.
Yeah, beautiful. I had that conversation with millions and millions. I won't even go into how many.
Can I piggyback on that? That we're not only not the only factor, but that what is being talked about here is happening in 1,000 other ways. This very thing that we're are we creating a movement, or are we really one of the many ways that a movement of movements that is already emergent is manifesting? And honestly, if that isn't the case, what chance is there that we get where we need to go, right? We're just tapping into something much, much bigger and doing our part in this conversation and in our other work. But that feels like an important distinction to me, particularly in addressing other people's sense, if they listen to this, of, you got to get on board with this approach and this group and this way, because we've figured it out,
Yeah, and I personally have always seen us as a contribution to a global movement to create a more humane world, and that if we're anything other than that, that's just hubris. It's a combination of hubris and scarcity. If we don't say we're the only one, then nobody will help us, that's scarcity. And yeah, so Susan, and then let's move to the next question.
Okay, well, I was actually going to backtrack just a touch because a while back, Carl said that there's different kinds of indicators. There's the indicators of success overall, like this stuff works. And then there's the indicators that are actually milestones for those of us who are working towards that ultimate success. And then combining that with, are we talking about indicators for the world or indicators for us who are working at this? And my mind started going towards the indicators provide us with milestones for when and how can we go deeper and expand the ripples and learn what else there is to learn about doing this. Because right now we have the beautiful model that Hildy has figured out how to express, but that's not the be all and end all. What else is there to learn? And as we're moving along and we're learning from where we're reaching the milestones, where we're not reaching the milestones, what else are we going to learn? And the indicators will help us learn.
Oh yeah, which leads towards what Mark was saying about evolving the thinking.
Susan also made a very important point there about some of those ripples are deeper.
Right.
One of the problems that we have in the social sector is that we are obsessed with scale. I mean, everything now must be global. Yeah, I mean, you look at we're all obsessed with what eBay and Google and stuff. I mean, every social change product now has to be global. Actually, we might achieve a much bigger social change by having deeper ripples and really quite profoundly changing a smaller number of people.
Wow.
Let's create waves.
Well, and so that is one of the things that indicators lets us know is which makes more sense. Yeah. Yeah. I'm trying to write at the same time because my brain only works when I'm writing.
Hildy, just a quick comment. I just want to reflect on what Ben was saying and the idea of ownership, that if you're trying to own this, it really falls into the whole commerce business, idea of, it's identified as an X product or an X idea or an X name versus this is a community and this is a worldwide community.
And that whole thing of attribution and ownership leads into competition, which prevents us from linking arms. Yes, absolutely. Prevents us from linking arms and that whole issue of what does it take to link arms because we feel better when we're linking arms and when we're excelling within that. So, we've got this ridiculous notion that excelling means we must compete. And it doesn't. There's excelling within, and then there's excelling against. And do we need to excel against, which is very, very good at leading to short-term gain and long-term not so much. So question before we go into, because that's going to lead us into whoo, which our conversations frequently go to because they're fun. If all of this were to be the result of our indicators, what are the kinds of indicators, let's not name them, but what kinds of things would people need to see? What would they need to feel? What would they need to hear? We've talked about stories. What would people need to see? What would they need to hear? What would they need to feel?
I think in the stories they're seeing, these are fellow humans of this world. It's not a superhero story. So, and I think back to the point of there'll be ripples all over the world that we don't necessarily know about. I think there'll be more people in the world able to unpack those ripples to people to say, Sarah's not a superstar. Let me unpack what's really going on there. In whatever language is working, it's not saying, here's some catalytic thinking in action, but it's helping more and more people see what happens when we start with relationships and bringing our whole authentic self into the room.
Yeah, that whole thing that Susan was talking about before, more people understanding, for instance, causality. Yeah. Great. What else would people need to see and hear and feel in order to have these results?
I think a basic thing that we've seen when you're trying to create a movement is just a change in the common language. An example that I can give is, for a couple of years, we worked on a project, United Way, to change the whole focus around youth programming. And we introduced the concept of developmental assets. And we started to use that word. People said, nobody's ever going to understand what that means. So rather than focus on what are the deficits, what are the assets we want to build to make, kids more resilient and stuff like that. But within a couple of years, after working with so many groups, in meetings, and people would generate just that, say that word, and people know what it meant. So what is it, when we talk about catalytic, what are the positive asset-oriented language that we want rather than deficit language?
Great language. What else? What would we see? What would people need to see and feel and hear to feel that inspiration, to feel that sense of collaboration? What would they need to see in those indicators? What would they need to see in those stories?
I think we're overthinking this. When I think of, and that sounds really bad, but they just need to see our authentic self and see authentic connectedness around us and what's exhibited within our daily lives and within our workplace. And it doesn't need to be this grand indicator, because when you show up into a space where you see that people are being connected and feel connected and bring out the best of one another, that's enough. And people ask the question, how do you have that? How can we get more of that? Where is a space that we can be connected within to that allows us to experience what best looks like, what great looks like? And again, it's going back to bringing out, how do we do this? And the thing is showing up authentically and vulnerably. It doesn't take a grand experiment to do this. It's, again, we were created to be authentic and to be vulnerable. And when we try to put indicators on this, we're just saying we're another experiment. We're not experiments. We have been made to do something this great and this easily, but we've forgotten how to be our authentic self because of the masquerade that we put on within our societies. And so when we show up and we're authentic, it's something that people then question, how do we do this? And you say, be yourself. And they have to break down those own barriers. And then by asking those questions that don't come from a place of scarcity and don't come from a place of threatening, it's easier for them to show up and be themselves in those moments as well.
I think in addition to use the phrase everybody else has, to piggyback on that, I think in addition to authenticity and vulnerability, you have to experience and exhibit enthusiasm. I think that's a really important quality and attribute that people need to bring to the table.
But the question was, what did people need to know? Was that the question?
What do people need to know or feel or see in those stories and indicators?
I think they need to know that it's real, that it's common sense, that it's simple, and that it's not woo-woo religion or some fancy new business change thing that we can all do in a training this afternoon.
So let me tell you a story. In the UK, if you have depression and you go to your what we call a general practitioner or a medic, as you might call it, you'll most likely be treated as depression is a medical problem, and you'll be prescribed something like citalopram, some sort of drug to deal with your depression. And it doesn't work. And people have to go back to the medic, and every time you go back, it costs the government money and so on. So there's a fantastic little project called ArtLift. And instead of being prescribed drugs, you go to your GP and the doctor prescribes that you spend 6 weeks with an artist learning how to paint. And guess what? After you learn how to paint, you are much less likely to experience depression, and you are much less likely to go back to the GP and ask for treatment for your depression. Why am I telling you this? Well, first of all, there's a story there, and Sue will be able to tell the story better than I can, but there are elements of the story where you have a hero who is in trouble, you have a dilemma that they face, and you have some sort of resolution of that dilemma at the end, and it is a story that anyone who's in this conversation could relate to, because we all have family or friends that have experienced that. But also, Artlift has had randomized control trials performed on it to see whether or not it works. So, as Jane said before, there are some people that much prefer the statistical sort of representation of what works. So I can get a GP to come into this conversation and tell you that if she prescribes drugs for your depression, it costs them $10 for the drugs, and it costs them $100 for the appointment to come and prescribe the drugs. But if you visit an artist, it's a one-off payment of $200, but then the medic never sees you again. So there's a saving to the government over 5 years of $5,000. I don't know, whatever the number is.
Right.
So it's what we can see in ourselves.
That's a wonderful systems change story, the kind that's great, and I love it. And I'm not a statistical person. I just keep focusing on when Hildy asked about what do we hear. I'd like to be able to hear positive conversations when I'm on the subway and in the grocery line, buying a coffee, sitting down with a stranger. The more and more often, because these are milestones, we could check in regularly, how often in our daily lives are we hearing positive conversations around us compared to what we used to hear? And whether that's somebody talking to their toddler in a grocery store about whether or not they can have a candy bar, or somebody meeting with a new nonprofit organizations for the first time. Right now, we all have this worry that we're going to walk into one of these scarcity discussions.
I want to say, like, personally, I'm on psychiatric meds for anxiety and depression, would be dead without them. So I would like to see that the stories we tell are not, this should happen instead of this, but this should happen as well as this, because I'd be dead if I went to an arts place. So that's all there is to it.
I think that there is a piece here, Stacy and Carl, about, and we've talked about this in the prior hour, that stories, I think, need to be able to say, this is what's possible, not this is what you should do.
Yeah, that's what I'm kind of saying with that. Is that's a piece of how to tell that story. And Kent just posted a really great thing. We need to hear that often our fears are unwarranted. I think that's huge. That's huge in the stories, because it's almost like there's a reassurance that needs to happen.
Yes. And Kent, can I just say, I'm so glad you're here.
Yeah, I mean,
I know I just talked, but I just want to
you can add, right?
Mention to Stacy that I just read one of Warren Berger's The Beautiful Question blogs, and what he said was always add S, so that people are asked about, possibilities, not one possible way. So you're dead on. We're not trying to tell everyone that art works. So music works for me somewhat. It's helped a lot, but it might not work for somebody else. But always add the S. What are the possibilities?
I think that there's a big piece here about effective stories talk about what is possible rather than what you should do. Because there is so much you should. There's that sense of what is possible. That's the inspiration. The what you should do is what brings up all of the defensiveness of, well, I can't because, and I don't have time, and you don't live my life, and so yeah, I think they talk about possibilities versus prescription.
When going back to the original, well, one of the original questions, I don't know which one it was, about what would people need to see, hear, feel, believe out of those stories, is that stories also contain examples of somebody taking, it would be nice to have stories that show people taking the concepts behind the change and using them themselves, so that it is not a facilitator that comes in and here's a way to make this change, but that then there is that ripple obvious, so that they feel like they can take ownership of it and use it elsewhere in their lives.
One of the most powerful stories that I tell from a stage is when I talk about using catalytic thinking when it came to the decision about my mom stopping driving. And that's the one that people come up to me afterwards and say, okay, what'd you do and how did you, and you know, I told this story once and someone came up to me afterwards in a group of 300 people to talk about their parenting. They wanted to talk about parenting. The group was 300 board of trustee members from a region. And I was brought in to talk about boards, and what people wanted to talk about was their kids and their parents and because that's life. Yeah. What other things would people need to see and hear and feel in these stories in order for them to be inspired and breaking down walls and feeling like there was possibility and seeing the path and possibly being able to replicate?
I think one of the things that they need to feel is to feel heard.
Talk about that more in the form of a story. So what would that look like in stories?
I think when we talk about telling stories, we tell the stories. I know in my training I talk about we tell the stories that our donors or supporters, our advocates want to hear. And they'll tell you what those stories are if you listen carefully. So listening to what people are telling us allows them to be heard and allows us to formulate the stories that makes them feel connected. And again, it makes them feel like their life matters. You talked about the people coming up to you and all they wanted to talk about was their life, their families. I listened to our beginning of this conversation where you ask everybody what are they celebrating, and everyone celebrated something that was personal to them. So I think that really looking people's eyes and hearing them and then reflecting that in the story that they want to hear has got a lot of value and is really important. It's a really important component.
You are raising something for me, Susan, that I had never thought about. And that is that there's different, because it's not a full thought, I can't guarantee that it's going to be in English, so I'll just warn you there. There's different environments in which we're telling stories. So we may be telling a story on a blog. We may be telling a story talking to an investor. We may be but there's also the ability to hear the story in the moment and identify it as a story.
Yes.
So if we're in conversation with an investor so there's something that has to do with being in the moment with someone, that we have the opportunity to hear their story and point it out as one. And that's just suddenly occurring to me, which is why it's not necessarily in English, but the ability to listen for that story and to make it explicit and to shine a light on it. Maybe the most powerful story that we can tell is the story that's standing right in front of us that we didn't know we were hearing until we heard it.
Exactly.
Wow.
I think this success are also invitations. So they're not packaged up stories, and they're not stories that have an end, but the stories will also, in whatever the avenue of sharing them into someone, to a host of possibilities. It's not just here's our story, here's how we know something great happened, but if that triggers something, if that ignites someone, they're energized, they want to learn, they want to connect human to human with us, that's what we're about.
You know, sometimes the ongoing story, the continuing story, I may not have been interested in chapter 1, but if I come in chapter 3, and so here's what happened now, not to sound like clickbait, but you won't believe what happened next. But if I come in the middle of the story, it makes me want to go back to the beginning of the story. So that continuing saga is, yeah. What else would people need to feel and hear and see in stories?
When we tell stories, you know, at and through Common, for us, it's always about proximity, both emotionally and physically. So I think that, you know, and the intention is always to eliminate as much of the gap as possible. So the closer that we can make a person feel to the story or identify as the story, the more effective we are. So I would say we would want people to feel, you know, close emotionally and physically. So when it comes to actually being in the world and doing things, that doesn't feel like a large step or a leap, but it's actually right there and available.
What does that look like? Give me more.
So let's say, take cancer, for example. So somebody who has either experienced cancer or had a family member experience cancer, or a friend, or just somebody in their life will resonate in a very close manner to a cause or a conversation or a story about cancer. And then for them to take action out in the community is really a factor of, you know, the distance or the gap between themselves and where they need to go or where they need to be in order to actually act on that in the community. So that's the physical side of proximity.
Gotcha. Yeah, I like the closing of the gap piece.
Yeah.
Where are they? What does it take to close that gap? I know Carl needs to leave a little bit early. Carl, last thoughts and reflections. What's standing out for you in the conversation? You're muted.
Sorry. What stands out for me in the conversation is you began what I came saying, the importance of language and how we sort of have subtly changed our language over the course of the conversation away from indicators to stories. Which, I mean, I'm comfortable with both. I'm a researcher by trade, but I find myself certainly in today's society of thinking much more about stories, and it's well worth coming back to again. Bye, everyone.
Thank you, Carl.
Good to see you all.
Thank you.
Hi, Carl. Kent had a tweet that we need to listen to and note, quote, alien views and actions that are more, quote, successful than ours, and learn to use them.
Okay, repeat that again and louder.
Sure. We need to listen to and note, quote, alien views and actions that are more, quote, successful than ours, and learn to use them.
Mm-hmm.
And if I could, again, to use the term piggyback off of Kent's sentiment there, and this actually also ties a little bit to what you were just saying, Mark, that I think something that I would want to see are stories that are both very similar to ones that I could experience or identify with, but then also ones that are extremely different from anything that I could experience, because I think the identification piece, imagining myself being able to tell that story in first person, but then also seeing the experience of someone so completely different from me that I can see its applicability is universal. I think it's sort of like it needs to go from one end of the spectrum to the other.
Are there things in particular that are striking you that would be indicators? Is there something in particular that you can put your finger on and say that would be different? That would look like some of what you guys are talking about here? I noted before, Sean, when you were talking about language change, I think that would be an obvious one. That if in job interviews and in the questions that we encounter in our day-to-day lives, I think that some of the big things that occur to me is language change, questions change. I'm wondering if we would actually see the media asking different questions. If we're, I mean, what strikes you that we might actually see?
I would love for all of, sorry. I would love for all of us to stop using jargon. That is the one thing that just makes me crazy. So if a year from now we've had a much reduced use of jargon in our world, I would think that would be a very strong indicator that we were making some progress.
If we weren't using jargon, what would we be using?
Real language. You know, we're not talking about children who are food insecure. We're talking about children who are hungry. We are not talking about trauma competent parenting. We are talking about children who have been traumatized by their circumstances and parents who need to understand that. We just use language and stop using jargon.
I'd vote for stop using acronyms. Use real words. Anything else? What else would we be saying?
I was thinking tied to the media, but everywhere in the world, it's not just at the you a bone, and it's your human interest story, and it's supposed to be some feel-good kind of thing. And the stories that go viral on social media now are, if you start unpacking all of those, they all get to humans being at their best. So the stories that would start being covered, all humans bringing out their, it's, you know, everywhere, anywhere in the world. That becomes the new norm that we talked about earlier. Still happens, but there's a host
really
of good to be celebrating.
That's a really interesting thing. And I was thinking similar. I was thinking about how in everything that happens in the world, you can see the negative scenario and negative future coming out of that, but you can also see the positive. So it's a choice that storytellers make to tell the negative frame or the positive frame. So if we start to see the choices made differently, that you're seeing more, this hurricane happened and then everybody got together and cleaned up the neighborhood. You're still reporting on the hurricane happening, but it's a different, it's just a very different story that you're telling.
Yeah, what's so interesting about the clickbait stuff is that if you were to look at it, and you're right, I think it was Rebecca said that, or whoever said it, I lost track too, of the stuff that goes viral on the internet. The clickbait stuff of you won't believe what happened next is always good. You know, they're always hugging. It's always the big kid who stood up for the little kid. It's a little puppy who's, I mean, they're always good. That's the stuff that we want to see. We want to see the happy ever after. I'm thinking about the renaming of, and I don't even know to what, but things like the criminal justice system. What if we didn't call it the criminal justice system? And I haven't even gone to, what would we call it? Seeing different questions being asked between whatever warring factions pick one.
In our organization, we're working with offenders to build second chances organizations. So the idea is if your organization will take somebody to community service after an offense, they're a second chances organization. So the criminal justice system is actually the second chances system.
Ooh.
I love that shift
Pretty,
in mind,
hey?
Stacy. Love that.
So I just, quick comment, nonprofits, community benefit organizations.
Yep. Yeah. I have to say this, we have to stop. That just makes me crazy because I would love to go for another hour or two, but we need to stop. What we will be doing is continuing. We're going to pull all this stuff together, put it out on the blog, continuing the conversation wherever we can figure out how to have the conversation, because I think the what would we see conversation is going to be awfully fun. And what I'd like to ask each of you is if you could just take a deep breath, if you took some notes, maybe go back and circle something that stood out for you, and let's just do a moment of reflection and share what stood out for you. And whoever is most comfortable doing so most quickly, start the ball rolling of what stood out for you in this conversation.
I can go first. Hildy, actually, the last thing that you just said about, renaming or using different language to describe things, and, just using simple language, going back to Sue's comments, those two things just really hit me in the side of the head. It was like, yeah, exactly. And when I heard you sharing and speaking those words, I was just reminded about the degree to which my thinking is ingrained and how limited it is. So it's really wonderful to be part of a conversation with people who are really kind of stretching the edges, so to speak.
Hey, for stretching. Thank you, and I'm glad you were here.
Thanks for having me.
Hildy, I really enjoyed the shift in thinking from this collective group of brain trust, that it almost immediately shifted from using language that is very corporate speak, indicators, and softening that to become stories, and using stories as the benchmark for the change that we're trying to see. I think that really, that and to Mark's point about changing the language, and softening that language, and to Caitlin's point about authenticity and vulnerability, I think all of those are really vital pieces, and I loved seeing a shift to that over the time that we've been online together.
Thank you, Sue. I'm so glad you were here.
Well, to perpetuate this thing focusing on language, I think one of the great opportunities here in terms of what you can see and feel is how over time this might integrate itself with any organization, on how we rewrite our annual reports, how we rewrite our newsletters, how perhaps we redefine our missions with other words or visions or ethics and principles. I know the soapbox I constantly stand on just with youth program organizations, this is, why do you always use the word at risk? Pick a term like at promise or something that denotes a positive thing. So I think that positive reflection and change is and how we integrate that in everything we do.
I'm so glad you were here, Sean. It's wonderful. I'm so glad Susan introduced you to our community and that you are part of us. So I'm glad you're here.
Thank you.
You too.
Go ahead. I was struck towards the end by a large section of us beginning to move in the direction of the fact that the people that we are working with and talking to and to whom we are telling the stories are also trying to speak to us. And I really began to see us start moving in the direction, I loved the line, listen for their story and shine a light on it, Sue. It's really a kind of an important thing that we forget a lot, except that, of course, it really is the thing that underlies catalytic thinking. So.
Oh, thank you. I'm so glad you were here, Anne.
Ben posted something, and he's posted it to everybody, and this really is something I want to reflect on, is that the communal possibility is that space or porous container where a collective exists for the realization of all the possibilities of its members. So that we as thinking about that, is that we as a collective, whether it's this group, larger group, bigger group, the whole world, is that we are a space in which everybody's possibility can emerge.
And that was, of course, those are Peter Block's words, not mine. And I think one thing I was
I saw the quote marks, but I wasn't quite sure what they were.
Yeah, this fabulous book, Community, the Structure of Belonging. And I was really struck by how much the thinking in there, and the 6 conversations he talks about, one of which is possibility. There's also invitation, which someone mentioned. and ownership, which is all about our stories. That's where he's particularly talking about that, and the distinction between our attachment to our old stories and our openness to new ones, that I alluded to in another chat. So that was what really struck me, was how relevant his thinking continues to be for me, and how I just see it showing up so powerfully in transformational spaces. Another core, I'm sure you know this, Sylvie, you must know the book, right? He talks about the shift from problem solving to possibility as one of the cores. So and that's right at your headlines here in this group. So thank you for inviting me in.
Absolutely. I actually had the opportunity, if you look at our podcast page, I had the opportunity to interview Peter several years ago, probably 5-6 years ago, about his thoughts about community. So it was awfully fun. I'm so glad you were here, Ben. Who else? What is your reflection?
Go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead, Josie.
Oh, I wanted to say that I think the thing that's standing out for me is coming into this conversation, I was thinking about stories as a way to augment evaluation, or, it's a way to supplement sort of hard measures of success, or, indicators of success. But through the course of our conversation, I've been thinking about it as that being the indicator of success itself, and what other examples are there out in the world that use that same sort of model. And I was thinking about StoryCorps, which maybe some of you folks are familiar with, but that really is sort of the purpose of collecting stories, using that as a way of connection and of sort of understanding our collective humanity. And I wonder if there is something there, some common thread that may be applicable to what we're talking about here.
Yeah, wow, thank you. Thank you. I always get so much when you're part of the conversation, Joyce. I'm thinking about the twist from stories supplementing data to data supplementing stories, and that data is a tiny point within a story. But as humans, our survival is based on stories. It's not based on statistics. And we've totally flipped that in the way we tell our story. We tell our story by numbers. Isn't that interesting to think about it just in that flipping of that language? So thank you for that.
Data is actually an accumulation of stories.
And parsing it down into a number.
Yeah, but every single data point is a story.
Yeah, yeah. Stacy, you've been chomping to say what your reflection is.
I think thinking about the density of community leaders, and maybe with that a lower bar of engagement, a lower bar of what it takes to become a community leader and become effective. And so much of that is facilitated both by these kinds of leadership strategies, but also that you can do a lot online now, and that's much more accessible. So it's that kind of marriage of technology and leadership style that, and creating the future is a lot about leadership style.
Wow. Yeah, yeah. I'm just so glad you're here as part of our leadership.
I got the style.
You definitely got the style. Definitely got the style. Caitlin, Angie, Jane, what's standing out to you guys?
Well, a lot has already been said. The transition to stories. I'm just sitting here loving that. I'm sitting here saying, "Oh, Sean just said something. I can go after him like someday on a blog," and such. Because we'll get back to that kind of thing. What I do notice is it's wonderful to have this large group. We're hearing some different ways of looking at things. It keeps us from getting insular. If the group expands, because hey, we're a movement and it's fluid, so that we don't get bogged down on anything, and we keep hearing these wonderful insights. You sit here for 2 hours saying, yeah, oh yeah, that's wonderful. Oh look, another light bulb just went off when I connected those two ideas that people have been talking about. So I'm just mostly basking in how wonderful it is to get back to these meetings.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, I'm glad you were here.
I think for me, there's a few different things that I always appreciate about being part of this. Number one, the opportunity to sit here and be in conversation with all of you. It's always a wonderful time. But something that really stood out to me was jargon and stripping that away and getting back to the reality of what it is. And turning statistics to numbers and stories, and each of those are representing a story. Another one is leadership. This last week I heard a quote that, mom asked a daughter what it meant to be a leader, and she said it meant to be a servant to others. And the reality of this is, by showing up in our authentic self, we are serving others. And so I think that was another connection point and another light bulb that went off in my head.
Wonderful.
Thank you all. I appreciate your time.
Thank you. Thank you. Absolutely. Angie, what stood out for you?
Hey, sorry, my internet connection is kind of iffy. I hope you can hear me okay. I guess my main thinking right now is, if catalytic thinking or creating the future values mission were the normal, were the new normal, which it should be, it also makes it maybe more challenging to see where success lies if it's so ingrained in everything we do. And I like the idea of stories because it's people-centered. And I think people-centered is where we have to have a lot of our language in order to say these values.
Wonderful. Well, hinky internet and all, I'm really, really glad that you were here. So, Dimitri, what is standing out for you?
Connections, that the new to the known, the jargon to the simple, the business to the social, all of this is in that sort of connection between things, and being able to make that explicit, being able to make a connection between my story and what you're telling me and your story. That to me has been sort of the overall reflection on this is that this is all about connection, and we're all connected. So, you know, what a fortunate thing that is. So that's my reflection.
Beautiful, beautiful. And is there anybody I missed? I didn't think so. But
I can't say.
Rebecca, oh, what is you, darling?
I'm just thinking so much on the power of stories, which has been a long through line at creating the future in all of us as humans. But this gathering is part of our story of what our mission success looks like. Like these couple hours we spent together in community, where we welcome some folks to this community who had never been with us before, and how it's such a natural place. This is what authenticity looks like, where you are always welcoming and inviting, and what active leadership to the new norm is all about.
Thank you. I'm sorry, I forgot you. Dimitri, you said Kent had something?
Yeah, Kent's reflection is that this conversation was so different from the norm, and it always is. Thank you.
Well, Kent, we are so glad that you are here, and you always add to it. So the thing that is standing out for me is, and you started it, Rebecca, is that when conversations are rooted in questions, and we give people even just a smidge of, because I can give you guys lots and lots of background and tell you to read, 9 million miles of stuff to get up to speed. It's amazing how we can have these really, really relevant conversations to the things that matter to an organization. And everybody is always asking us, well, you're just bringing community members in, and you're just, how do they know what to talk about? And it's like, this was one of the most amazing conversations. This was a wonderful conversation, and it is possible. And the thing that just constantly struck me throughout this entire 2 hours is that this is a group that's never been together before, and you guys were all sparking off of each other and listening to each other and hearing each other. and that every time I'm told this is not possible, and every time I'm told you need a board that has diversity on it, and we say, yeah, we've got a really small board and a big community that comes together and shares all their thinking, that it's like you don't need to have representation when you have inclusion and people are actually at the table having conversation. And so I'm just so grateful to you guys for blowing my mind for most of the day. And I'm gonna re-listen to this conversation because being the facilitator, I even get to chew on some of the stuff I'd love to chew on. If you have thoughts in listening to this, or my two are driving or in the shower, please jot them down and either tweet them or put them in the blog comments. We will take the chat that everybody in here was using in Zoom and post the relevant stuff of that as well. We're just really looking forward to moving forward with all this stuff. So thank you guys. Pretty amazing to be with you all and just very, very grateful.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.